Hi, today we're going to discuss the Domestic Violence Act. Now, for domestic violence to exist, the courts look for some form of relationship between the parties. This can be married persons, persons who live together, and could even be a parent and child or blood relations. The often confusing one is where someone is dating or in some form of intimate relationship. In any of these relationships, domestic violence can exist and you may require protection, but the issue is what is the violence component and what protection is allowed or you can seek from the courts. Now, when you talk about violence in a relationship, it can be, which is obviously the worst one, physical, where there's an assault of some sort, abuse, which is in any form of financial, emotional, could also include intimidation, harassment, and stalking. Now, if any one of these factors, not conclusive I must add, exist in your relationship and it has the effect of causing harm, imminent or otherwise, and harm relates to something that affects your safety, health, or well-being, you would then be able to approach a domestic violence court for an order preventing such violence. Now, when you go to the domestic violence court, the first thing they're going to ask you for is a form to be filled in. These forms are supplied. One of the key factors in an application for domestic violence is which court you go to. And in this regard, you can look at yourself or what we call the respondent. That is the person who's the suspect or person causing the harm. Either where the party lives, works, or carries on business would be the court that you must go to. Once the form is filled in, it is then taken to a magistrate who decides whether you must get what we call an interim protection order or a notice to show cause. Now, each of these have different effects. If the harm is imminent and you require immediate protection, you will be issued with an interim protection order. If the harm is not of such an imminent nature and perhaps something that just requires an explanation or a request to stop such harm, then it's a notice to show cause. To explain each one of these aspects, firstly, the interim protection order. The interim protection order has a return date as well as interim relief. The interim relief says that we'll call him X may not do A, B, or C. He may not get the help of someone else to do A, B, or C. He may not contact, telephone, or even reside in the same house as Y. Due to our law allowing the other side to explain themselves, a return date is given where X comes to court with an affidavit or representation and tries to set aside the interim relief. To explain, the interim relief takes effect immediately from the time you apply for it till the return date, based on what happens on the return date. To backtrack, once you get the interim relief, you then attend before a police station, and in the company of the police, the order is served on X. Once the order is served on X, that return of service, as we call it, which is stamped by the police confirming that X received it, is sent back to court to show the court that X did in fact receive it, and that will be dealt with on the return date. Now, the other option available is the notice to show cause. The process is very similar to the interim relief, although you don't have immediate relief. The relief you seek will only be granted on the return date. So the same process is followed. Went to the police station, order served on X, and the return of service is delivered to court. But there's no immediate relief, and then X will approach court with an explanation. When an explanation is given, the court will make a decision. That decision inquiry is the same for both the interim protection as well as the notice to show cause. Ultimately, the court, after the inquiry, will either set aside the interim protection order or set aside the notice to show cause. And then once the order is set aside, that immediate relief you obtained is cancelled. But the other option to these reliefs is where the orders are confirmed. That means you then have a final order of relief insofar as the relief you obtained there or there, and that becomes a final order. That is an explanation of the domestic violence